Spoiler warning. In order to give this game a proper review, I have to reveal some of its surprises. I encourage you to watch this video anyway, since I don't think the spoilers will ruin the game. But if you're extra sensitive to such reveals, then by all means give this game a go. Just make sure that you don't give up before the end. Destroy Space Aliens is a perfect example of why I don't review games until I finish them, because this game defies its terrible first impressions spectacularly. From a game design perspective, creating the beginning of a game can be extremely difficult. You need to build faith with your audience that you're going to take them places that are worthwhile. And this is especially true with hard video games, since you're also asking them to get good to get to the end. The only thing that Destroy Space Aliens offers from the outset is a nostalgic presentation from perhaps all the wrong places. But where it ends up is somewhere truly special, and it's really a shame that most people won't get there. One of the first things you'll see when you start a new game is a message that warns you that the game does not save your progress. Instead, you have to enter a long and arduous password every time you boot the game up to move forward. After that warning about the password, you get a message introducing the plot, which is that your goal is to destroy space aliens. With the influx of so many games made based on the developer's nostalgia, it was pretty easy for me to simply assume what I was getting myself into. I thought at the time of starting that I was in for yet another interpretation of someone's childhood, and so often these interpretations cherry-pick all the wrong things. The password system to me was clear evidence of this. Add in the fact that your character moves slow and his attacks seem to have animation lag, and I was sure that this wasn't a game that was worthwhile. After you get past the intro stage, you're given a level select screen, which sealed the deal for me. This game wasn't actually a Metroidvania, and thus I didn't need to be playing it for the Metroidvania review project. Given the game's initial frustrations, this was somewhat a relief for me. Cut to a year later when I discovered Flying Fire's developer blog and found out that I had made a mistake. At some point in the game, I didn't know when, the game does indeed become a Metroidvania. Feeling slightly sheepish, I finally sat down to force myself to the end of the game, fully expecting my opinions to remain the same. The game is frustrating at first. You're given two weapons and both of them are liabilities. After each swing or every shot, you have a tremendous amount of end lag that you have to remember, or else you put yourself in the position to be hit every time you strike. But while the game completely fails at tutorializing its mechanics, the rules are consistent. After punching that brick wall for tens of minutes, it finally clicked. I realized that the end lag could be subverted, or even cancelled by jumping, and in fact you can double up on attacks if timed correctly. This is actually very similar to many of the official Castlevania games and their copycats. There are basically only 3 enemy types, and once you learn their patterns, it's only a matter of reacting to every given ambush. My initial frustration and weakness gradually turned into strength, and that sweet feeling of accomplishment started to seep in with each encounter. Then, I reached my first boss at the end of a level, and it was not only fun to fight, it was that special level of challenge versus capability, the kind that makes you feel like the boss when you finally overcome it. So now it was my goal to fight more bosses. My appetite was whet. I could make comparisons between Destroy Space Aliens and classic Mega Man. Certainly the bosses are very reminiscent of what that series has to offer, but the levels themselves are set up in more of an RPG manner. You don't walk into situations where enemies are just waiting for you most of the time. Instead, the enemies just appear around you, already set up to ambush, and you have to figure out how to escape without taking damage. You're given 2 tools for this from the beginning. You have a sword and a ranged Hadouken style attack. At first, it seems like the sword is just better. It takes 3 hits to kill most things with the sword and 5 with the gun. But of course, range is always a bit of an advantage. And even better, the gun pierces every enemy it passes through, making it great for crowds. Plus, one of the 3 enemy types likes to stay just outside of your reach, forcing you to switch to the gun. All of these advantages make the gun seem really good, but remember, you're trying to get out of ambushes. Killing things fast is also very important. It's a wonderful balance that adds some interesting options to an otherwise super simple combat system. Although, with 4 stages to choose from, it's a little disappointing to find out that you don't unlock any new powers from any of them. It begs the question as to why you're given a choice in the first place, but the reasons became clearer to me later on. After completing the 4 stages, you're given a 5th, and still no Metroidvania. This final chosen stage is harder than the 4 previous, but at this point I was determined to see it to the end. It's worth noting that every boss that you fight has similarities to every boss you fight after, so you can recognize patterns of future bosses more easily as you gain experience with the bosses you fight throughout the game. This 5th and so-called final level is a culmination of everything you learned up to that point. In fact, the boss itself is a literal combination of every boss you fought before. By the time you face him, you feel like an amazing pro at the game, which makes defeating that boss that much more satisfying. Then, as the boss explodes, suddenly, the game suddenly turns upside down and changes the rules entirely. It becomes the Metroidvania I was promised. The level design, subsequent bosses, and everything else from that point forward is basically perfect. Every new Metroidvania power-up I found filled me with a special glee that made me even more excited to see what comes next. The final encounters of this game are as memorable as the best games in the genre, and they're clearly inspired by those titles. I could add a criticism that some of the unlockable powers control schemes could use another button or two, but for the most part the second and third acts in their entirety are like a powerful release from the frustrations of the first act into pure gaming bliss. It was at this point that I finally realized the design intentions of the game's progression from a level select to the meat of the game. There is a dichotomy that every Metroidvania game designer has to deal with, which is the in-game character's power level versus the player's capability. The goal of a game centered on challenging the player is to help the player grow, but often in Metroidvania games, finding power-ups or leveling up can undermine that, and sometimes even make it boring.
Wait, is he already dead? Holy smokes.
He cannot handle 6 super missiles to the face. Besides being an homage to a certain Game Boy Castlevania game, those first 4 levels are like a school before you're released into the world, with the 5th level acting as the final test. I would argue that by the time you get to the Metroidvania section of the game, it's necessary that you clearly understand the game's mechanics and have mastered them. Otherwise, I would wager that it would be more frustrating for the player in the long run. And even though the focus of the beginning of the game is to force the player to achieve this mastery, it still maintains some portion of your ability to choose where you go, telegraphing the Metroidvania castle you'd soon be playing. But I can't ignore that Destroy Space Aliens is still so very bad at welcoming the player from the outset. I think most players are going to give up just like I did, maybe even rant to all their friends about how terrible the controls feel from the start, and how bland the game seems at first. But it's so worth it to push through. The final area of the game brought back feelings of accomplishment that are extremely rare, and nostalgic, like I was a kid again, beating Mega Man for the first time. I have been made a fan of this game, but I still have to question whether I can, with such a rough beginning, give this game a high score, and include it with the other games that handle the all-important first impression so much better. Can I really place this game in my top rankings and recommend it as a hidden gem across the internet, when the reality is that most players will likely give up, for completely rational reasons, before even getting past the beginning? Well, I just did. I give the combat a 4 out of 5. In Destroy Space Aliens, you'll be overcoming overwhelming ambushes and taking down challenging but fair bosses. Some commands later in the game could have used an extra button to make things a little easier, but the controls are generally consistent. I give the platforming a 3 out of 5. Platforming generally isn't a challenge unless enemies are introduced. I give the exploration a 4 out of 5. The castle's intriguing maze-like design hides secrets in rewarding areas, and the overall design is remarkably intuitive. I give the puzzles a 2 out of 5. That's mostly because there are no puzzles to speak of, other than the typical, how do I get up there? I give the story a 3 out of 5. The narrative actually eventually becomes an awesome hook with an awesome payoff. It's nothing profound, but it can suck you in anyway. I give the graphics a 3.5 out of 5. The level of detail on the enemies and backgrounds is astounding, if you like the green monochromatic aesthetic. I give the music a 3.5 out of 5. The music is catchy and appropriate given the aesthetic. Replayability gets a 3 out of 5. There's an easy and normal difficulty mode, but for the most part, replayability is going to come from self-imposed challenges, such as speedrunning or taking advantage of some of the sequence breaks that exist in the game. However, if you go into the Steam beta, there is a randomizer mode, which could up this score quite a bit, depending on how much you value that. The final score that I give to Destroy Space Aliens is a 4 out of 5. Keep in mind, this score is not a mathematical product of the other scores. Destroy Space Aliens is an absolute gem, hidden within itself. If you can get past the brick wall learning curve, you're in for something truly special, paying homage to the bests of the genre. Thank you for watching our review. You can find the links related to Destroy Space Aliens in the description below. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, please like and subscribe. We also have several other reviews on this channel that we recommend you check out. You can also visit our website where we have over 150 written reviews for Metroidvania related games. Join us every Saturday morning for the Metroidvania review stream on Twitch, or every Wednesday evening for the Our Metroidvania podcast. You can find links for all those things and more in the description below. I want to thank you again for your time, and I hope you have an especially adventurous day.